If you know anything about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you probably know that things aren't going very well for Russia right now, and Putin may have just made his biggest blunder yet. And you might be surprised to learn that it's the same one countries made all the way back in World War II. Let's look at what Putin could have gotten right if he had simply opened a history book. 2 humiliating setbacks bookended Putin's surprising announcement to mobilize 300,000 fresh conscripts. The first, when Ukrainian forces liberated 12,000 square kilometers of territory in and around Kharkiv. And the second, when Russian military leaders announced they would be withdrawing from Kherson back across the Dnipro River, abandoning a strategic city they had allegedly annexed only several weeks prior. The Ukrainian advance inflicted a heavy toll on both sides, but while Ukraine relies heavily on Western support to sustain its operations, Putin's isolated regime and its haphazardly executed mobilization are showing signs of great distress. Rumors of mass looting, casualties, and logistical failures are now commonplace across the Russian front lines. Many problems stem from the depleted nature of Russian forces, said to be operating at 40 to 50% of their normal strength. Putin and his military seem to be struggling with basic manpower issues that have plagued fighting armies for millennia, and have tried to patch huge gaps in the lines with poorly trained conscripts rush forward just days after being pressed into service. And if he continues to replace mass casualties with ill-trained recruits, maintaining unit cohesion will become increasingly difficult. Putin is about to find out that something as mundane sounding as unit cohesion is actually a big deal, and here's why. Military cohesion, defined as a unit's ability to stay together and fight effectively against heavy opposition, has been described as a prerequisite for success in combat. Cohesion, or the close bonding together of soldiers, is intricately interwoven with troop morale, or a unit's spirit and will to fight. Loss, trauma, and suffering are inevitabilities in armed conflict, as soldiers lose comrades, experience fatigue, and struggle to understand why they fight while navigating the dense fog of war. Morale diminishes. As it does, fighting effectiveness atrophies in kind. Both concepts, cohesion and morale, are symbiotic. The more cohesive and tight-knit a fighting unit becomes, the more it will maintain morale as it is exposed to mission stress. The less cohesive a fighting unit is, the more its morale will degrade as setbacks and stressors mount. When wars begin to measure their duration in years, not months, and the uncertainties of winter loom, maintaining tactical unit cohesion becomes a real challenge. So how is high-task cohesion achieved? Cohesion is contingent on many things. The quality of training, equipment, and leadership are crucial, but also the time spent training under competent leadership and with proven equipment matters a great deal. Fighting units must meld horizontally and vertically to be effective. Soldiers can develop strong relationships with their superior officers and commanders, vertical bonding, but they must also build confidence in each other, horizontal bonding. It's this familiarity, this brotherhood, that is cultivated prior to combat and solidifies itself in battle that supports many soldiers through tough deployments. Military forces are sustained by their belief in each other first, and by their weapons, equipment, and leaders second. With its undeniable impact on unit morale, commanders are highly incentivized to promote cohesion, and the erosion of unit cohesion can have a devastating snowball effect. As casualties are replaced with unfamiliar replacements who lack the social bonds forged in training, discipline, respect, and trust can break down. When this occurs on a large scale, morale plummets, leading to a loss of control, panic, decreased fighting effectiveness, and even insubordination. And this is precisely what Russian forces have been experiencing in Ukraine over the past few months. After starting with an initial invasion force of 190,000 soldiers, in just 8 short months, Western officials estimate that well over half of this number, or some 100,000 of them, have been rendered combat ineffective. It's no surprise then when Putin recently announced a partial mobilization of 300,000 new conscripts, a last-ditch attempt to fill depleted ranks and slow the rate of combat ineffectiveness. Though the official strength of the Russian armed forces is listed as just over 1 million, the 168 Battalion tactical groups at the tip of its spear that make up Russia's airborne, ground, and marine forces apparently never exceeded 168,000. Supplemented by reserve personnel at no more than 100,000, Putin previously had to bolster these forces with tens of thousands of troops from Rosgvardia, or the Russian National Guard, including Chechen units, as well as other paramilitary and mercenary groups. With many of these forces now at zero, he has turned to his partial mobilization to correct course. If this trend continues for Russia, manpower deficits could spell disaster for Putin's war effort in Ukraine. How can we be so sure that this will most likely occur? Because it's happened before. Recruitment and replacement issues are nothing new. The United States military has repeatedly grappled with the same challenges dating all the way back to revolutionary times. During the American Civil War, the injection of inexperienced volunteers and conscripts into the Union Army led General Ulysses S. Grant to observe how one drafted man in an old regiment is worth 3 in a new one. During the 20th century, however, the United States began fighting larger-scale global wars, where mass casualty rates prompted officials to seriously consider its replacement policies. During World War I, American Army units experimented by breaking up existing units to furnish replacements for depleted formations, something you might expect Russia to try. Well, the bad news for Putin is that this experiment failed big time, and morale suffered as a result. Reflecting on difficulties faced in this system, American General Fox Connor later remarked that, with replacements promptly assigned to fill the blank files and with casualties not crushing, odds are the veterans talked up their unit and its exploits. However, when replacements did not arrive and the veterans watched their group grow smaller and smaller, every man's thoughts turned to the hardships suffered and the buddy killed alongside him. Morale crumbles. As Russian casualties begin to dwarf those suffered by the United States during the global war on terror, Vietnam, and many other smaller 20th century conflicts, Putin would do well to look at the lessons learned during World War II. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States Army trained some 2,670,000 men as replacements, or more than twice the number of men actually assigned to its 89 combat divisions employed by the end of the war. The last thing the Army wanted to do was break up existing units for replacements, as they had done during the First World War, and so they opted for an individual replacement system, or IRS, no relation to the tax guys. Under the IRS, unless a soldier arrived with their unit at the beginning of a campaign or conflict, most came in as individual replacements, replacing casualties where and when it was most necessary. The goal was to keep divisions manned at their correct strength and through a constant influx of replacements in an attempt to prevent flagging combat effectiveness as casualties mounted. But it was a difficult system, especially on the replacements themselves. After training in the United States for a few months, they were shipped overseas, not part of any combat division or unit, mind you, but as members of a group that felt more like refugees than soldiers, none of whom knew their final destination. When they arrived, they were sent to a replacement depot, a grim place behind the front lines where untested soldiers could spend anywhere from several weeks to several months undergoing generic training exercises, few of which could ever prepare them for the reality of combat. When their time came, they were dumped off at their units, welcomed or not by superiors who then informed them of their role. It was best to arrive during a lull in the fighting, a time when veterans could impart wisdom and ease them into learning the ins and outs of combat. Many did not have this luxury, however, and were integrated into squads in the midst of a battle. Under these conditions, veteran soldiers had far more to worry about than training up a brand new soldier, probably fresh out of high school. New recruits made plenty of mistakes due to a combination of ignorance, fear, and bravado. When such mistakes cost the lives of comrades, resentment among older men grew. But in general, veterans tried to help newcomers feel welcome, since their own survival depended on how competently they could be taught to do their job. As you might expect, the system has its fair share of detractors, with new soldiers struggling to adapt to their roles and, in more extreme cases, posing risks to their comrades. Some called the system inefficient, wasteful, and militarily unsound. If replacements were capable, they were accepted and integrated into the tight-knit groups. If they became casualties early on, older troops became more and more wary of helping their replacements. Some argued that the United States should adopt the German model. Under their Unit Replacement System, or URS, entire units were pulled off the front lines and reconstituted as new ones. In this system, new recruits joined and trained with veteran survivors, establishing new unit cultures that helped bind them together. In this way, one historian writes, familiarity and cohesiveness could be built up among the new men, who were all in the same boat as replacements. The veterans could then provide leadership when the outfit was sent back to the front. The United States considered the unit replacement system too logistically complicated to adopt. With so few full-strength infantry divisions at their disposal scattered around the globe, it would simply be too hard to transport, arm, and retrain entire replacement units. Instead, they did it gradually while the fighting was ongoing. But during periods of intense fighting, heavy attrition meant cooks, truck drivers, engineers, and other support personnel had to be pulled from non-combat units and placed in front lines. Elsewhere, casualties among junior officers caused a gradual reduction in combat efficiency due to the loss of experienced leaders and a lack of opportunity to train and indoctrinate new leaders. Perpetual losses became an almost unsolvable problem. Ultimately, the quality of American replacements was often called into question. The decision to integrate them individually at the battalion level and below enabled infantry divisions to remain effective in battle. Unit cohesion and morale could survive the pitfalls of the American individual replacement policy so long as the reinforcements kept coming, and they did, improving as time went on. An American veteran at Anzio wrote that if older soldiers could get fresh arrivals past the initial shock period, they soon became one of the unit and were as effective as anyone else. But that was when replacements in their fighting units were fully supported by a united population and a robust economy at home. So what does this mean for Russia, whose domestic support for Putin's invasion is beginning to fray and whose economy continues to crumble under the weight of international sanctions? Individual and unit replacement systems can work, given they are properly planned, administered, and executed. But so far, it hasn't looked like the Russian Ministry of Defense is up to the task. Despite recent claims that Russia has mobilized 318,000 people, Putin's partial mobilization has failed to reach its intended goals. Tens of thousands of conscripts were sent almost immediately to the front lines, mere days after donning military uniforms, many of which had to be purchased by the conscripts themselves. Unlike American replacements during World War II who were well-fed, well-equipped, and spent several weeks, if not months, after basic training at an in-theater replacement depot, Russian recruits are deposited at new units with sparse training lacking any sort of horizontal or vertical bond with those alongside them. One battalion of new Russian conscripts who were called to military service on October 16th, just 2 weeks later they reached the front, were handed shovels and began digging trenches throughout the night. But there weren't enough shovels to go around, a fact that speaks to severe equipment shortages throughout the Russian armed forces. And by the next morning, with enemy drones hovering overhead, Ukrainian artillery lit up the sky and shells started raining down all around. I saw men being ripped apart in front of me, and most of our unit is gone, destroyed. Alexei Agafonov, one of the conscripts, told reporters. It was hell, he said, adding that his unit commanders abandoned them just before the shelling started. Only 130 draftees of the original 570 survived, many of whom, Agafonov claimed, are losing their minds after what happened. No one wants to go back, with the same shovels used to dig trenches now being used to dig out the dead. Another survivor angrily complained how 2 weeks of training doesn't prepare you for this. Similar reports continue to emerge from Ukraine, where the death toll is climbing. A recent report from the Institute for the Study of War indicates that the Russian army is wasting the fresh supply of mobilized personnel on marginal gains instead of massing sufficient soldiers to ensure success. As setbacks mount and manpower needs become more acute, Russian conscripts will be pressed into the fight indefinitely, few adequately prepared for what they will experience, and even fewer convinced that they can ultimately prevail. As it was with combat infantrymen during World War II, Russian conscripts will not be replaced unless they become a casualty. Invariably, as newcomers replace lost friends, the longer they survive, the more jaded they will become. Russia's current replacement strategy is kind of like trying to fill a pitcher of water that's full of holes. If Russia continues to throw ill-prepared conscripts into the front lines, it must be prepared to accept the inevitable loss in tactical unit cohesion. And as we know, the loss of unit cohesion almost certainly precedes an inevitable and potentially irreversible breakdown in morale. And when your own forces lose the will to fight, you will never achieve victory. But what do you think? Will Putin's current replacement strategy ultimately help Russia win the war against Ukraine, or will the loss of trained soldiers result in a fatal breakdown of morale among the Russian army? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more military analysis from military experts.